welcome everybody. Mahesh, let's start with the lockdown and I guess also PNG state of emergency. At what stage did you start responding to the state of emergency? And what were the first things CPL Group did when you first got news that there was something different happening?
I think the awareness started when the Asian flight stopped. I think that was the first jolter. We had to sort of start taking some sort of heed of what we're going to do. And when the first case got isolated from the expatriate who flew into the country, that actually put everybody into a spin, knowing what was happening in China and elsewhere in the world. So immediately, the first thing we did was, go down into our sanitization program. The key was really to get our staff trained up first, because I think there was a lot of fear amongst our Papua New Guinea staff. A lot of people just did not show up to work for fear of the virus. So we had to sort of start the sanitization program first in the stores and in the offices. We were lucky being in the pharmaceutical industry. We had access to sanitizers because within days we ran out of stocks at the front line, literally days, because if there was panic buying in Papua New Guinea, it was of sanitizers because it's not something that anybody carries in large volumes here. So sanitizing from the trolleys, trying to offer sanitizers to customers coming in. We had to fly in some temperature guns quickly. Again, there was a worldwide rush for it, so it was difficult getting hold of it. And unless we paid cash up front, there was no shipments being sent. And as you know, with the Forex issue in Papua New Guinea, that was a major challenge. So the first shipment, actually, I had to use my personal credit card to get some floating from Singapore. So at least our store and our staff were covered. So we went into action pretty quickly. And we started actually from the offices. We had a plan B of isolating people to work from various sites that we've got rather than coming into the head office itself. I think the biggest challenge was trying to get the customers with the social distancing and the hygiene standard. That was the biggest fear.
Did you find that you had clear instruction from the authorities, or did you have to make up a lot of these practices for yourself, or were they really expansions of existing practices?
I had a slight advantage because I was part of the NOC business team that we first got put together as a forum to speak to the controller and the police minister and the authorities. So I had access to the NOC, which was rather scary when we found out that there was an infection found some weeks later. Yes. But I had through the business council, we had privy to information, but it was still very, very sporadic. I mean, every day was a new day. We ourselves didn't know that a decision had been made overnight and the social media had been hit before it actually came to public. So it was, I suppose, an organized chaos, I suppose. But I think, hats off to the authorities. They did react in a timely manner. They did what they could, with the facilities we've got in Papua New Guinea. So, no, I think information was coming. It was a bit disjointed because we didn't know who was in charge. The provincial governments were making their own decisions. That was the biggest chaos we had. Each governor, each province started making their own rules, not knowing the state controller had all the authority. So they took a while, and there was a lot of confusion in the front line. For example, is the liquor ban on or is it off? Is it the shops to be opened or not opened? But I think, we've gone past that, and I think there's a lot of understanding now.
Yeah. So we are quite a way into PNG's state of emergency, and my understanding is that it's due to expire on the 2nd of June unless extended by Parliament. And who knows what's going to happen at that time. We've got a couple of weeks to wait and find out, I guess. But Wayne, just about...
Actually, the expiry is on the 6th. Sorry, Andrew. The expiry is on the 6th. There's a confusion. The Parliament sits on the 2nd.
Right. That's right.
That's right. That's when the decision will be made.
Mm-hmm. Wayne, just about the issue of managing staff during this period of emergency. You've heard what Mahesh had to say. Some other thoughts perhaps about the way in which you need to deal with staff, because clearly staff are critical, not just for the way they're operating in the business day to day, but also how they interact with customers?
Yes, and I think, thanks, and I think Mahesh summed it up pretty well in terms of what they did there. It's very much initially with all the unknowns. The first priority was to keep your staff safe. Make sure that the office was a safe place to work. If it wasn't, to work out how you could work remotely, or Mahesh's staff. There's many frontline staff. They're dealing with face to face with customers. In many offices, a lot of that face to face contact was put on hold over the period. So more communication by distance, but to try and work out how you could keep your staff productively employed remotely. And that brought out issues of communications and whether you had the ability to do that. And I think it raises a lot of questions going forward in terms of what plans companies make for the future, because there's every possibility that in the future there'll be another period where there's a lockdown of some sort or a business disruption. And it's given a lot of companies the opportunity to work out how they can keep their staff safe, how they can work productively remotely, and how they can engage and provide business continuity in the future.
And there is a clear understanding in PNG that employers have a lot more responsibility, I guess, for their employees that maybe they do in some other jurisdictions, particularly even at the height of this emergency, getting people into the office to actually work. I understand the PMVs are pretty much back to normal now, Mahesh, but how did you get people into work?
I think that was a huge challenge because, we had PMV stoppage. So a lot of people did not know actually whether it was on again or off again. And with the social distancing issues, it was literally overnight. And then the curfew came in. Then the curfew needed to be extended for a day because it was too late to notice. So that was our biggest challenge. I mean, we had a few spikes. I know you have this question later on, but we had some spikes in sales, I think, when the first announcement came through. But then, all the gains were virtually wiped out because we've got about a couple of thousand staff around Port Moresby, and they come from all nook and crannies. So we had to actually get buses organized to pick them up, drop them off, and nighttime issues. A lot of people were even scared to get on the bus because of the social distancing issues. So our biggest fear was what happens. And as Wayne mentioned, we were the frontliners, so we had no choice but to open the stores. And a couple of times where situation arose that, two staff turned up and we got a 40,000 square foot supermarket to run. So it was slightly challenging on that.
I bet. Let's talk a little bit about the supply chain. Clearly, a retail group like CPL, Mahesh, has an enormous supply chain dealing with suppliers both overseas and local. What steps have you taken to ensure continuity of supply during this time, and what challenges have you faced in doing that?
We were at a slight advantage there because, as you know, in Papua New Guinea, because of the nuances of supply lines across the country and the lead times, we actually carry a buffer stock of up to 3 months, which is not ideal in a real world, but it is downright practical. So we had enough stocks to cover. Our fear was replenishment because, as you know, India, which supplies a lot of generic pharmaceuticals, they actually banned exports of the top 10 pharmaceuticals. So we needed to make sure that we preserve that. As far as the food lines go, bulk of our stocks were actually drawn locally. If you look at the bulk lines of rice, canned meats, sugar, flour, they were locally sourced. So
the staples?
Staples were good. The supply lines of produce and things out of Australia was a challenge because Australia's the shipping lines were not calling in, and there was a confusion where the quarantine would apply if the ships had to quarantine itself for 2 weeks before they were allowed to enter the port. Big challenge with local supplies of produce because, as you know, we trying to be champions of local produce here. And with the border closures in between, and this is the dilemma we had being part of that NOC division, was the police minister and the controller said NCD and Central Province were deemed as one province. Now, the two governors thought otherwise. So our girls coming to work had a huge challenge. Our farmers came up to the border, which is literally about 4 kilometers from the city center, and they said, no, you can't enter the city. So a lot of wastage happened from the farmers, and this is the livelihood. So I think they were probably the biggest impacted.
Mm. And what sort of instruction or advice did you give to your local suppliers?
Firstly, it was hard to, these are all cash crop farmers, Andrew, and
Yes.
a lot of them don't have mobile phones and communications, or they run out of credit every half a day. We actually told them to actually come up to the border and we'll try and grab the produce from them. Some of them, snuck it through unbeknown to us. We thought they had a pass. But it was short-lived. It was for about a week or so because the government realized that this was their livelihood. So the produce started coming in about a week's time. We chartered aircraft. We normally have air flights from Hagen for produce. I mean, obviously that was at a go slow because the flights were cancelled. But all in all, as I said, there was pain for about a week or so. But ultimately, we sort of got over a lot of the issues.
That's good.
Going forward, though.
Sorry, Mahesh, carry on.
Issue, just saying, going forward, we're seeing some issues with Australia now, with some dairy products coming out of there. There's delays in that,
Yes.
and some produce because of the shipping lines.
Right. Wayne, if you're a business that is caught in a supply chain, some thoughts on basically how you might be able to manage the supply process. I guess one of the key things is also making sure that if you're ordering materials that your account is up to date with them, which is sometimes a challenge at the moment, particularly if you're ordering stuff from overseas, but also making sure that you've got those supply chains, your own supply chains under control. Some thoughts on that, please, Wayne.
Yeah, I think what the last couple of months have they've created such a massive disruption to all sorts of channels. So all of a sudden, if you're faced with not being able to get supplies, and quite often many businesses have been faced with people who owe them money not being able to pay them or not wanting to pay them to preserve their own cash. So you end up with a bit of you sort of end up as the sandwich in the middle. So I think it's made businesses and certainly if it hasn't, it should make businesses closely examine their sort of cash flows, try and see where they can get cash and where they need to adjust supply terms. Maybe people are reliant on one supplier. Maybe they need to look at the alternatives just to prevent against disruptions in the future. But for many businesses, the difficulty is not knowing how long it's going to last. How long the travel ban's going to be on, how long that sort of disruption is, and so trying to make sure that you as a business have got enough cash to see through. And it's quite difficult because you can ordinarily do cash flow forecasts based on what you would expect sales to be and your normal trading terms. There are not many normal conditions prevailing at the moment, so it's become very difficult for businesses.
So how do you manage that cash flow if you're a business, particularly if you're obviously a company the size of CPL is an exception in PNG rather than the rule, but if you're maybe a slightly smaller company, what advice can you give to people about managing that cash flow? How much capital do they need to have to manage this situation going forward?
Well,
I think that's
sorry, mate.
Sorry, do you want to jump in there, Wayne?
No, go on, Wayne. So.
Okay, just in general terms, I think try and renegotiate with suppliers. Certainly in Port Moresby, I think a lot of people have negotiated rental deals and try and renegotiate terms to extend those out, and to try and look at where you can make savings and try and make the business as efficient as possible, so that you can conserve what cash you do have. It's sort of brought a crisis like this just brings home to try and get back to basics in a business, I guess. The other interesting point is how do you engage with your customers? I mean, Mahesh's business is very frontline, but there are many businesses out there that don't have a shop front per se, and so
Yes.
you've got to maintain your relationships with your clients, and if they want to buy things from you, if they can't come to your shop, how do you market your goods to them, or how do you let them know what they can buy and what the price is? So it's created quite a few challenges and I guess opportunities for business to sort of rethink the way they do business.
Mahesh, you were going to jump in there?
No, I was saying there's a big challenge for the smaller enterprises. I was talking to the representatives of the MSMEs, and
Yes.
their message has been very clear, is that they are struggling. They want rent relief. Mm-hmm. They really don't want any handouts as such. And one thing that we supported as well, big businesses as well, is saying to the government, listen, there's so many unpaid bills. All you need to do is pay your bills. We don't want a handout. And that message doesn't seem to be still, getting through. I mean, they talk about it, but if you ask a lot of the small contractors, a lot of small guys who are supplying the government or had dealings with government or authorities, they're struggling for cash flow. And they're the ones that I think the government needs to be very, very mindful of.
That's something that consistently comes up when I'm talking to business people, not just in Moresby, but in all around PNG, is they're owed money for a project that happened last year or even the year before from APEC and so on. And I guess one can only hope that the recently issued government bond, the COVID-19 bond, might assist the government in maybe at least starting to loosen some of the purse strings.
Well, I hope so, because I don't think we can say it any more clearly than this to the government. And as I said, it's not big businesses, it's the small guys who are hurting. And if that message doesn't get through, I don't know what will, because it's been said in multiple forums. The Treasurer's acknowledged it, but I think there's very little actually happening. Yep.
I just had a comment from one of our attendees. You've hit the nail on the head, Mahesh, with that. Thank you, Gary, for that comment. Let's talk about capital. Obviously, if you've got no money coming in at the moment, it's tough, very tough. And looking at costs is one area that you have to do in such a circumstance. But I guess the other issue is maybe there's opportunity to finance a different kind of either a remodeling of your manufacturing process to create new products, or to actually address a particular need in the market that's present right now. And that might need capital, working capital. Have you had particular conversations, Mahesh, with your finances? I imagine you've got banks supporting you and so on. Have you had particular conversations about that? And maybe once you've answered that question, Wayne, maybe you could have a little bit of a comment about the kind of conversations you might be able to have with various organizations about raising capital at this time. Mahesh, first of all.
Andrew, I think that's an interesting point, because it does actually show the origins of the banks. We've got very few overseas banks left here now. Yes. And I think the international banks are overly cautious because of what's happening in the Australian market. The local banks are more understanding because they've got their pulse to the ground. And it's very loud and clear and very, very straightforward that the Aussie banks are very, very cautious, which doesn't help our cause. My question to them is, why the hell are you guys here? But the local banks, we've had a chat with BSP and Kina banks. I mean, they're more sensitive to the situation. But I think they've been fairly supportive. They are actually entertaining requests for moratoriums for interest payments, extended credit facilities, and all that. So I think overall they've been quite helpful.
Wayne?
Yeah, I think that by and large, I can't speak to particular banks, but I've certainly in conversations, I think the banks have been relatively proactive in engaging with their customers to see, where they can assist and to make sure that their forecasting is good and that that they can anticipate the future to a larger degree. as I said, the difficulty is, when I guess the banks are also concerned about their risk and their the ability of businesses to provide accurate forecasts and the quality of the assets as well, because shock like this also brings into question asset values. So all of a sudden, is that property worth what it was 6 months ago? So I think there'll be quite a large I suppose adjustment or consideration of asset values, and I would suspect that the credit departments of the banks will be looking at that in the future.
I guess one of the key things is to keep the lines of communication going. If you are in a position where you do have a bank loan or some kind of overdraft facility, is to make sure that you're talking regularly to your bankers.
Yes, indeed.
So I've got a comment here which is about tax. Troy Stubbings, thank you very much, Troy, for your question. Troy says he appreciates the Internal Revenue Commission must continue to collect taxes, and I believe they've actually been doing quite a job on their collections of GST, for example, over the last 6 months. But is there a business or a tax agent discussion with the IRC and the government to relax the punitive penalties for late payments and so on? I guess that's the thing, is that a lot of people do still need to keep their tax obligations going at this stage. That's certainly the message we're getting from the IRC, isn't it, Wayne?
Yeah, I think the IRC has been pretty communicative, and I don't know the specifics, but I know that they certainly have offered some sorts of relief and some sorts of deferment of certain obligations. I can't speak to the specifics of those, but yes, there is some. I think there's some relief on timing and penalties. But I guess at the end of the day, the government needs to collect its taxes. So I think it'll probably pursue those as per normal.
Mahesh, I believe that the tax department, the IRC, does have a different way of treating larger taxpayers than smaller taxpayers. How are you finding your relationship with the IRC at the moment?
I think there's two sides to it. Firstly, they are very inefficient in their record keeping and updating, so that we're having a lot of tussles with them. But on the other side, the positive side, the commissioner, I've had a couple of chats with him. They're quite they're entertaining any requests and things. And I think his point was, if it has been a good taxpayer, if there are issues, we will help them out. So really, I think instead of a blanket wiping out of the punitive penalties, is to say, okay, what is your track record? And he himself is very frustrated with his own team at the lethargy and the work processes that's been going on at IRC. So, but he's just one person. I mean, his aim is really to try and clean up all the dirt and the inefficiencies around the system. It's going to take a while, but I think anybody seeking that exemption should have a chat with them. I think they're quite encouraging in that sense.
Mm-hmm. I guess the next stage, as we approach the end of the state of emergency, was, as you corrected me, Mahesh, is on the 6th, due to end on the 6th of June. Then I guess the question is, what's next for business? And in particular, how do you plan as a business in an environment where there's so much uncertainty in the future? What structures can you put in place inside your business to actually address the future? What are you doing at the moment, Mahesh, maybe at board level, management level, to look to the future beyond 6th of June? And then I might get Wayne to maybe make some further comments about the kind of things business needs to be thinking about at this stage. So Mahesh first, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, the first thing I did this morning, which wasn't a nice thing, was sent a very nasty message out to all my team. Because as I said, we started the practice of hand sanitizing, temperature checks. But I found actually about a week now that everybody's starting to sort of forget about distancing, forget about the processes. Nobody checked my temperature this morning when I walked in. And so I was really annoyed. And every Thursday I write a talk survey to all my staff. And it was a very, very blunt message to say, guys, it's not over. So I think the biggest challenge I go to dinner parties and people start giving you hugs and stuff. And I said, whoa, hang on, it's not over yet. And these are educated, senior level Papua New Guineans, expatriates and all. And I think the biggest message that needs to go out very bluntly to say, guys, we can't let our guards down. If you've seen the news today, yesterday, single day, they had 106,000 positive cases identified globally. So, and that's the highest in a single day. I mean, there's stats about everywhere. So I think going forward, our messaging from the board and to the management as well, we cannot let our guard down. We have a terrible time upkeeping social distancing in our shops. It's going to happen this afternoon because the liquor stores are closed tomorrow. So there'll be a huge backup of line. And actually, we need to get security in to actually police them. So this is added pressure on our own staff because the customers just won't listen. So there needs to be a very, very blunt message going out to everybody. Guys, it's not over yet. As far as the business side goes, we have done a forecast review for all our businesses last 2 weeks ago, looking at the trends that's happened so far. And we made some adjustments. We are comfortable in our essential businesses will carry on. The discretionary businesses will struggle. So we'll have to look at cost adjustments there. But as you said, every day is a new day. We just don't know what's going to happen. And it's very hard to do a forecast. So we've done a best judgment forecast, which the board has signed off on. And we'll stick to that. Let's see how we go.
Yep. Wayne, some further comments on and how you can plan for this uncertain future.
Yes, I think that the primary thing that I suppose the data set of this pandemic in PNG, the testing's being expanded. The results of that may or may not prompt further actions. Could potentially extend the state of the emergency if the testing shows up data, but hopefully not. Really, just for businesses if something does happen, if there's a shock, to have in place things that from a professional staff, or so you can work remotely, that you can interact, that you've got the system set up to. If you have to divide your teams between home and away teams, how you can manage that effectively. And, that sort of increased working remotely, it raises all sorts of issues about, are you secure digitally, or, how exposed are you to threats of hacking? It's security issues around your IT systems. So there's quite a lot, I think. There'll be quite a lot of focus of that in the coming months, I guess, and really just to make sure everyone's got a plan in place. So if there is an issue, you can quickly swing into your plan B and operate effectively.
One question from our attendees, Mahesh, maybe you'd like to give us your best guess on this. One attendee asks, will PNG's economy ever recover?
But you're asking the most optimistic person on earth here. I said, yes, absolutely it will. The big question is when.
Yes. Well, the Bank of PNG in its latest monetary policy statement was suggesting that the rest of this year might be tough, close to zero growth. But they're suggesting that probably next year will be a V-shaped recovery. Do you have a sense of what's going on that might lead to that?
No, but I think everybody can guess about all the projects and all that stuff. But from what I hear on the ground and talking to people, there is an air of positiveness that something will happen. But there's so many external forces that will drive it. Commodity pricing, what happens to the big firms internationally. But from PNG perspective, I think because we run supermarkets in Fiji as well, we do a lot of comparisons. Fiji is just royally screwed with tourism because there's so much dependence on that. Whereas we still in PNG have got cash crop, we got farming, we got fishing to keep us, at least from the food security perspective, safe for the time being. As far as the income and spending power goes, that's going to be the challenge. But I think if the government spends the money wisely, which they are getting from the donors, I think it will just keep the economy chugging along for the time being until the big projects come online.
You'd make a good point that there are, to a certain extent, two economies within PNG. There is the informal domestic economy, and then there is the formal economy. And I guess people still have to eat. There are, depending on whether you believe the census figures, somewhere between 7 and 9 million people that need to eat, that need to have their basic needs addressed. The formal economy is somewhat different, Wayne, and is possibly a little bit more reliant, as Mahesh has suggested, on international connectivity with the international economy. In KPMG's thinking, what are people looking at as far as the global situation, how it might affect PNG?
Well, I think that from a global, I guess our biggest connection is really, with Australia in terms of goods and services, and a lot of skills and a lot of leisure and things like that. So, as Mahesh pointed out, a country like Fiji is highly reliant on tourism. PNG is less so, and PNG's economy is a lot less dependent on, say, hospitality and service industry than Australia would be. So I personally think that the economy will be fairly resilient. I think that commodity prices are obviously critical, and if the ability to generate or to get some projects over the line would be most helpful, and I think that'll help the economy bounce back fairly quickly. Other than that, in terms of international connectivity, I think in a way, we're relatively lucky that we relatively insulated, I guess, from some of the global pandemic, particularly in certain sectors. But it'll be a case of how quickly the economy can get back to normal in whatever shape normal looks.
We've got a few minutes left if anyone would like to ask any further questions, but while we're waiting for any further questions to come through, are you expecting, first of all, the state of emergency to be extended? Have you received any sort of indication at this stage, either of you, about whether it will be extended beyond the 6th of June?
I haven't heard that.
No, I've not heard anything, but my gut feeling says, and it is absolute gut feel to say, it may be extended in a different format. But just going back to a prior point, Andrew, I just got a WhatsApp message from a mate of mine who's a senior Papua New Guinean, and the government's been advocating this freight subsidy from Lae on the sea cargo with Bismarck. You may have heard it in the newspapers,
yes,
and we've sort of taken the lead and dropped the price of potatoes. So he sent me the advertisement we put out to say, oh, thank God for that. My family's going to switch from rice to potatoes this weekend. So there's a positive. There you go.
So it's time to put potatoes in the ground.
Well, rice, we have to import potatoes from the highlands.
A couple more questions. And for either of you want to jump in, do you foresee, this is from Robbie Huxley, do you foresee a reluctance for resources projects to go ahead due to the COVID-19 situation internationally?
Wayne?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Australia, for example, their resource, resources have been propping up the Australian economy, the exports of iron ore and things. Gold demand has been very high, but price has been good. It's a period of instability, and gold always does well in unstable times. Energy is the one sector that's really taken such a big hammering over COVID and other issues.
A massive hammering.
Yeah, really unprecedented hammering, and it's hard to see it coming back. Well, as the economy starts getting going, I think that those energy prices will rise. But I don't think COVID per se will have a particular impact on commodity prices. It's more the underlying demand, for basic commodities, it's driven by infrastructure spending around the world. Governments are going to have less money to spend on infrastructure, so that may dampen those prices. And as things stabilize, you'd potentially see gold coming down. All the stimulus packages around the world could very well start stimulating inflation, which would again be poor for gold. So the virus per se, or COVID per se, unlikely to have a huge impact.
Next question, how essential is restoring travel between PNG and Australia to the PNG economy? When do you think that will happen again? At the moment, of course, if you want to fly into PNG, you have to have 2 weeks of quarantine in one of Port Moresby's finest hotels. And ditto, if you want to come into Australia, you have to also spend 2 weeks in a hotel. So basically, you're up for a month's holiday if you want to actually enter PNG at the moment. How essential is restoring travel?
I guess from one point of view, from the tourism and the hotels point of view, it's obviously vital. It would be having a big impact on the hotels, those quarantine guests aside. And the advantage of quarantine guests also is that they generally pay up front, so that's quite useful for the hotels. But other than that, I mean, there are obviously a lot of expatriate workers that ordinarily work in PNG that are not here because they're stuck elsewhere. They're starting to come back, and so some of those skills are necessary, on the ground, and some are less necessary, and some stuff can be done remotely. But it'll probably make some businesses, give thought to the level of expatriate staffing that they require going forward. And it's certainly, I think it'll make the uncertainty over the next period may make it harder to attract good staff, good expatriate skills into PNG, given that there are likely to be travel issues for months to come, if not longer.
Mahesh, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I think yeah, Wayne's got the points covered, I think, but I think it is important, but we'll survive. We've survived this long, and Zoom works pretty well. So this is a real testing time to say, do we really need this many people in this town?
Well, we might leave it there too. There are plenty of other questions, and it strikes me that we will certainly be running additional sessions, and one of them will be on state-owned enterprises and infrastructure. So that's certainly one, and there's a whole different conversation we could be having about the political environment in Papua New Guinea right now. The Marape government, of course, is up for its 12-month anniversary, so it's a very, very new government, and there's a debate to be had and a discussion to be had about political circumstances, but that's probably for another session. For the moment, Mahesh and Wayne, I want to thank you again very much for providing your time this morning. It's been invaluable for helping us to make sense of the situation in PNG. And I'd like to also thank everyone who's sat in and listened to this conversation this morning. I have to say, no one appears to have left. We've had a steady group of people watching this session from the start. And so that suggests to me that in the great tradition of leaving people when wanting more, we should probably wind it up now. And so there's an appetite for an additional session a bit later on. But can I please thank both of you very much indeed for this morning, and the very best of luck in your own businesses moving forward. A little note to those people who are attending, there will be a video that's being recorded of this session, and that will be made available to you in due course, almost immediately following the session. And if you watch out on our website, Business Advantage PNG.com, on Monday, there'll be further information about this session as well. So for the moment, thank you very much indeed. We're going to close the session now, and we look forward to speaking to you again in the near future. Thank you very much.